Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It's not a ghost story, not really, but it begins like one. You're about to hear how I discovered music coming from my basement long after my husband had passed away. You probably won't survive this story. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to watch the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's comfortably embark on tonight's journey. It started on a Wednesday night, 2 years after my husband's funeral. I had just finished my tea, the kind he used to make with too much honey, and was about to head upstairs when I heard something. A soft hum, distant like a radio buried under blankets. At first I thought I'd left the TV on, but the sound was coming from the basement, a place I hadn't been in weeks. The basement was always his space. My husband loved tinkering with things, building shelves, repairing clocks, fixing radios. Nobody wanted any more. When he died, I couldn't bring myself to clean it out. His tools still hung neatly on the pegboard. His workbench still smelled faintly of sawdust and engine oil. So when that faint melody drifted up through the floorboards, my first reaction wasn't fear, it was disbelief. It sounded like him. My husband used to hum while he worked this old country tune from the 70s. He sang it off-key, but with a kind of warmth that made it impossible not to smile. And that night, that same tune was floating through my house. I froze halfway down the stairs, my hand gripping the railing. The rational part of me said it had to be something simple, a radio left on a neighbor's music bleeding through the walls, maybe even my imagination. Grief does strange things to people, especially when you live alone. People still debate whether grief can create hallucinations or if it simply amplifies the sounds around you until you start hearing what you miss the most. I turned on the basement light expecting to see, I don't know what, maybe an open window or a malfunctioning speaker. But when the bulb flickered on, everything was still. The workbench was covered in dust cobwebs hung like thin curtains across the corners, and the radio was unplugged. The sound had stopped. I stood there for a while, half expecting it to start again. My husband's old chair sat in the corner, tilted slightly forward, as if someone had just gotten up. My heart was beating so hard it echoed in my ears. "All right, Martha," I whispered to myself. "You're being ridiculous." I laughed softly, the kind of nervous laugh you give when you're trying to convince yourself nothing's wrong. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't imagined it. The house felt too still, too expectant. That night, I didn't sleep well. Every time the floor creaked, I thought I heard that same melody again faintly, as though someone were whistling through the walls. I even considered calling my daughter, but I knew what she'd say, that I needed company or therapy, or a hobby. Instead, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence stretch and bend. The next morning, I decided to test myself. I went down to the basement in daylight with my phone ready to record in case I heard it again. The air was cooler down there, dry and still. Sunlight from the small window cut through the dust like thin ribbons. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. My husband's old record player, the one I hadn't used in years, was plugged in. I never plugged it in. The cord had been wrapped around it since the day he died. I unplugged it immediately and stared at the outlet. No marks, no burn, no sign of tampering. Just that one detail out of place. I decided to tell my daughter that evening over dinner. "You're hearing music?" she asked, raising an eyebrow as she scrolled through her phone. "Mom, you've been alone too long?" Her husband Mark tried to smooth things over. "Maybe it's an old tape running," he said with a grin. "Those old machines sometimes start on their own." I nodded, pretending to agree, but deep down, I knew what I'd heard. And later that night, as I was washing the dishes, the same melody drifted up again, clearer this time, stronger. I turned off the faucet and froze. And then faintly underneath the music, I could hear something else. A voice. It was his. "Darling, you shouldn't be down here," he said, or at least that's what it sounded like. My hands shook so hard the plate slipped and shattered in the sink. I didn't sleep that night either. I just sat in the hallway outside the basement door, listening. The melody came and went, sometimes faint, sometimes strong, but always the same. By dawn, I was exhausted, but there was one thing I knew for sure: I wasn't imagining it. Something down there was playing his voice. Whether it was a recording or something worse, I couldn't tell. But I was going to find out. When I told my daughter and son-in-law what had happened the next morning, I expected comfort, maybe even curiosity. Instead, I got polite disbelief wrapped in forced smiles. "Mom, you probably left a speaker on somewhere," my daughter said, stirring her coffee as though it were the most ordinary conversation in the world. "You know those old Bluetooth things sometimes reconnect automatically." I reminded her that my husband never used Bluetooth. He barely managed his old flip phone. But she waved it off, glancing at Mark, who tried to hide a smirk. "You need to stop spending so much time in that house alone," he added. "It's been 2 years. You should come stay with us for a bit." I wanted to scream that I wasn't crazy, that I knew the sound of my husband's voice better than anyone. But instead, I just smiled, pretending not to notice the pity in their eyes. Later that night, as the rain tapped against the windows, I sat by the basement door again. It had become my ritual 1 cup of tea. The hallway light dimmed, waiting for the sound. Around 11:30, just as I was starting to drift off, there it was again. Faint at first, like the soft hum of a record starting to spin, then clearer, stronger, a voice. His voice humming that same tune, low and gentle. I pressed my ear to the door, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The words were faint, but unmistakable. It wasn't just humming. He was singing the same verse he used to sing while working. "If I could turn back time," the sound sent a chill crawling up my spine. It was so close, so real, that for a split second I wanted to open the door and call out to him. Instead, I froze. And that's when I heard something that made my blood run cold, 2 distinct sets of footsteps. One light, one heavy, moving slowly across the basement floor. I bolted upright, heart hammering, and grabbed my phone. I didn't go down, not yet. I dialed my daughter, and of course she didn't answer. So I called Mark. "There's someone in the basement," I whispered. "I can hear them." He sighed heavily through the receiver. "Mom, it's probably the furnace again. You always think—" He stopped mid-sentence. I could hear it through the phone, the faint sound of the music now echoing louder. He went silent for a moment, then muttered, "Okay, that's weird." 10 minutes later, headlights flooded my driveway. They arrived together, half-dressed for bed, Mark clutching a flashlight like a weapon. I stood behind them as they descended the basement stairs, the air tense and heavy. The hum had stopped again. Nothing but silence greeted us. "See," Mark said, swinging the light around. "No one here. No sound. No ghosts." But just as he said it, something metallic clattered in the corner. We all turned. There beside the old shelf lay my husband's favorite wrench, spinning slightly as if it had just rolled off the table. My daughter gasped and gripped my arm. "That's weird," she whispered. Mark picked it up, frowned, and placed it back on the table. "Probably fell," he said, though his voice wasn't quite as steady as before. We went back upstairs, but the mood had shifted. No one laughed anymore. Over dinner the next day, my daughter was quieter. She asked if I'd been sleeping well, and for once she didn't offer advice, just listened. That's when she admitted something I hadn't expected. "You know," she said softly, "I heard it too, last night, when we were in bed. Heard what I asked. The music. Faintly, like it was coming through the floor." She looked at me, her face pale. "Mark didn't want me to tell you. He thinks it'll make you worse." That confession hit me like a spark. I wasn't alone. It wasn't just my imagination. There was something real happening in that house. People still debate whether houses can hold energy echoes of laughter, grief, even sound. Some say it's science, others say it's memory, but I wasn't ready to make it mystical. I believed there had to be a logical reason. I just had to find it. So the next morning, I armed myself with a flashlight, my husband's old tool belt, and a determination I hadn't felt in years. The basement was going to give me answers. The moment I stepped down, the smell of damp concrete filled my nose. I scanned the walls, shelves, and floor. Every inch of it looked the same. But when I crouched near the old record player, I noticed something odd, a faint indentation in the dust where something rectangular had recently been moved. I brushed it gently with my hand, and there it was, an old shoebox half hidden behind a stack of unused tiles. Inside were small pieces of paper, old receipts, faded notes in my husband's handwriting, and tucked in the corner a small cassette tape labeled in black marker for after. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I didn't even own a working cassette player anymore, but I knew who did my grandson. He collects vintage tech, as he calls it. When he came over that weekend, I showed him the tape. "Whoa, that's ancient," he laughed. "You sure it's not just music? Can you play it for me?" I asked. My voice barely steady. He nodded and brought a small portable player from his backpack. When the tape began to roll, the room filled with a soft hiss and then a voice. My husband's voice. "If you're hearing this," he began, "I guess I'm gone. There's something you need to know." I nearly dropped the player. The sound was so clear, so alive, it made my chest tighten. My daughter, who had joined us, sat frozen beside me, her eyes wide. But before the message could continue, the tape abruptly stopped, snapped, tangled inside the reels. My grandson groaned, saying he could fix it later. But I wasn't thinking about the tape anymore. That moment confirmed everything. The music, the footsteps, the wrench, it all had meaning. My husband had left something behind, something he hadn't told anyone. My daughter reached for my hand. "Mom," she whispered, maybe you shouldn't keep listening." But I couldn't stop now. Whatever was on that tape, whatever he'd hidden in that basement, I needed to know. I needed to understand what he meant by something you need to know. People often say closure comes from letting go, but I was starting to think it comes from digging deeper, even if what you find breaks your heart. That night, I couldn't shake the sound of his voice, that deep, warm tone that always filled the house with calm, now reduced to a ghost in plastic tape. "There's something you need to know." It looped in my head until dawn. I sat in the kitchen staring at the steam rising from my untouched coffee, feeling both comforted and terrified. What could he have possibly meant by that? After 40 years of marriage, I thought I knew everything about him. Every habit, every secret smile, every silence. But now I wasn't so sure. When my grandson came back the next day, he handed me the repaired cassette. "Be gentle," he warned. I patched it with some tape so it might skip a bit. I nodded, heart pounding, and slid it back into the player. The static hissed for a few seconds, then his voice returned older, raspier, but still him. "If you're hearing this," he repeated, "it means I didn't get the chance to tell you in person. I've made mistakes, and there are things I should have explained long before now." My fingers tightened around the armrest. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he continued, "but you deserve to know everything about what's in the basement, about the account, about her." My blood turned cold. Her? I paused the tape, staring at the player as if it had just whispered a curse. My daughter, sitting across from me, looked stunned. "Her? Who's her?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," I said, though my voice betrayed a tremor I couldn't hide. People still debate whether it's better to know the truth, no matter how painful, or to live with the comfort of ignorance. I'd always believed truth was healing, but now I wasn't so sure. I pressed play again. "Don't hate me for this," his voice said, heavy with regret. "What happened wasn't what you think. It was about protecting you and our family. If the bank ever contacts you, call our lawyer, Robert Mills. He knows everything. He'll explain." Then silence. The tape ended, abruptly clicking in finality. My daughter stood and walked to the window, arms folded. "Mom, what is this? What bank? Who's her? What did Dad do?" I had no answer. My mind was racing, replaying the last few months before he died. He'd been distant, spending long evenings in the basement, saying he was fixing something important. I'd brushed it off as his way of staying busy. Now it all made sense, the secrecy, the phone calls he'd take outside the paperwork I wasn't supposed to see. After my daughter left, I sat alone with the tape, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock, two sounds that suddenly felt unbearable in their sameness. I couldn't just sit there. I needed to know what he meant about that account and the lawyer. I hadn't spoken to Robert Mills in years, not since the estate was settled after my husband's passing. So the next morning I called his office. When he answered, his tone was cautious, almost too calm. "Martha," he said, "I wondered when you'd reach out." My stomach tightened. "You knew I would," he sighed softly. "Your husband left me instructions. I wasn't to contact you unless you came to me first. Instructions for what I demanded." There was a long pause, papers rustling on the other end. "There's something in the will you were never meant to see until now. He made a last-minute change 2 days before his stroke." My grip on the phone tightened. "What kind of change?" "He opened a trust," the lawyer said slowly. "A separate account under a different name. It wasn't illegal, but unconventional. He designated the funds for someone else. Someone named Claire. The name hit me like a slap. Claire! I repeated, barely recognizing my own voice. "Who is she?" He didn't say. Only that she was to be cared for if anything happened to him. I sat in silence, the hum of the phone line filling the space between us. I could feel my pulse in my throat. "Is she—" I started, but couldn't finish. Martha Roberts said gently, "Your husband loved you very much." Whatever this was, I believe he thought he was protecting you. Protecting me. From what or from who? After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for hours staring at nothing. Protecting me was his favorite excuse whenever he made decisions without me, but this time it wasn't about a vacation or finances. This was different. That night, I couldn't resist the pull of the basement. I took a flashlight and crept down heart-pounding, searching for clues. I went through boxes of old tax papers, dusty tools, and his notebooks, and then I found something I'd never seen before, a small brown envelope labeled Personal, Do Not Open. Inside were faded letters dated 20 years ago, written in his handwriting but addressed to someone named Claire H. My hands trembled as I unfolded the first one. "You deserve the world even if I can't give it to you," it said. My breath caught. I read another. "I'll make sure you're safe no matter what it costs me." Each word felt like a knife turning slowly. I sank onto the floor surrounded by his handwriting, my tears smudging the ink. When I finally gathered myself, I noticed something at the bottom of the box, a small brass key attached to a tag labeled Locker 412, Central Storage. I didn't even know he had a locker. What could he possibly be hiding there? Before going to bed, I sat with the letters one last time. I wanted to hate him, but a part of me refused to. Marriage isn't built on perfection, it's built on choosing to stay even when it hurts. People still debate whether forgiveness is an act of strength or surrender. At that moment, I couldn't tell which one I was leaning toward. All I knew was that I needed to see what that key opened. The next morning, I drove to the central storage facility, the one on Maple Street near the old gas station. The clerk found the locker number and handed me the clipboard. "Hasn't been opened in over 5 years, she said, squinting at the records. "Guess you're due." My hands shook as I turned the key. The metal door creaked open, the smell of dust and motor oil rushing out. Inside were 3 boxes and a familiar old suitcase. His, the one he'd taken on business trips. I opened it and found documents, photos, and tucked between them a smaller envelope addressed to me. "Martha," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and the truth has finally found you. I never stopped loving you, but there was something I couldn't tell you. Something that could have destroyed us both if it came out while I was alive. I stopped reading, my heart pounding like a drum. My husband had secrets buried deeper than I ever imagined, and I was standing in the middle of them." I stood there inside that dim storage unit, the smell of paper and metal thick in the air, my husband's words burning through me like acid. Destroyed us both. What could he possibly mean by that? I sat down on the cold concrete floor, the letter trembling in my hands, and kept reading. 20 years ago, it continued, I made a choice that still haunts me. Claire wasn't who you think. She wasn't a lover, Martha. She was our son's daughter. My breath caught. I blinked, reread the line, thinking I'd misunderstood, but it was there, in black ink. Our son's daughter. My son David had died in a car accident when he was only 24. The grief had nearly destroyed both of us. He'd never married, never had children, or so I thought. When David was working in Oregon, the letter went on, he had a brief relationship. The woman was pregnant, but he didn't know. She never told him until years later. After David passed, she reached out to me desperate with nowhere to go. I helped her and the little girl quietly. I couldn't bear to tell you. I knew what losing him had done to you, and I was afraid this would reopen that wound. I felt my pulse slow to a dull, heavy throb. I stared at the words, the confession, that changed everything I thought I knew about my family. So Claire wasn't a stranger. She was my granddaughter. My husband had been supporting her in secret all these years. He'd kept her hidden, not because of shame, but because he thought it would protect me. I sat in that silence for a long time, listening to the faint hum of the facility lights, feeling the years fold in on themselves. Grief does that. It bends time, pulling you back into moments you thought you'd escaped. People still debate whether secrets protect love or poison it slowly over time. Sitting there, I realized it's both. Secrets can be built from love and rot from the inside all the same. I opened the second box, still half stunned. Inside were financial statements, monthly payments to someone named C. Hill. There were also letters from a young woman thanking him for helping me finish school and keeping his promise. My husband had been funding her life, college, rent, everything while I sat at home thinking we were just getting by on retirement savings. The strangest part, I didn't feel angry yet, just hollow. Like the ground beneath my feet had shifted. The next morning I called the lawyer again. "Robert," I said, "I found the letters. I know who Claire is now." There was silence on the other end, then a soft exhale. "I thought you might," he said quietly. "He made me promise to keep her existence private until you came across it yourself." Why, I asked, my voice shaking. Why all the secrecy? Because he said your husband was afraid that if you knew before he passed, you'd think he'd been unfaithful. And he couldn't bear that thought. I sat there in my kitchen, the morning light spilling across the table, trying to process it all. He had lied, but out of love. He had hidden the truth, but to protect me from pain. That's the thing about marriage. It's built on 1,000 small lies we tell to keep the peace. Some harmless, some fatal. I drove to the address listed on the letters, a small tidy house on the edge of town. A red bicycle leaned against the porch. I knocked on the door, heart racing. A woman in her 20s opened it tall with chestnut hair and the same green eyes my son used to have. "Hi," she said cautiously. "Can I help you?" I swallowed hard. "My name's Martha," I said. I think I'm your grandmother." Her eyes widened, her lips parting slightly as if she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. "You're his mother?" she whispered. I nodded, tears filling my eyes. She stepped aside wordlessly, and I walked into the small living room. Family photos lined the wall, here as a child, her graduation, and one picture I recognized instantly. My husband standing beside her at a piano recital, smiling the way he used to when he thought no one was watching. "He told me you were kind," she said softly. "He said you'd find your way to me one day." I sat down on her couch, overwhelmed. She made tea black with too much sugar, exactly how he used to make it. We talked for hours, about David, about her mother, about how my husband had helped her through college. She showed me the old letters he'd written, gentle fatherly words filled with advice and encouragement. "He came to every birthday until I was 15, she said. Then he said he had to stop. He said you were too fragile, that it would break your heart to know." I closed my eyes. He had been right in a way. If I'd known back then, maybe I couldn't have handled it. But now, sitting across from this young woman, my son's daughter, I felt a strange peace, like something long buried had finally surfaced for air. That night, as I drove home, I couldn't help but notice how the world outside seemed different, sharper, more real. The truth, as painful as it was, had finally set me free. But when I pulled into the driveway and saw my daughter waiting on the porch, arms crossed, I knew peace wouldn't last long. "Where were you?" she demanded. "I went to see someone," I said carefully. "Her name's Claire." The color drained from her face. "You found her?" "It wasn't a question. You knew," I whispered. She hesitated, then nodded. "Dad told me before he died. He said I had to keep it a secret from you. He thought you'd never forgive him. And you agreed I didn't have a choice." She snapped, tears in her eyes. "He was dying, Mom. He made me promise." The words hung between us like fog. I didn't shout. I didn't even cry. I just stood there feeling every lie, every omission settle on me like dust. "You should have trusted me," I said, finally, my voice breaking. "Both of you." She reached out, but I stepped back. I wasn't angry, not really, just tired. Decades of love and loyalty had been rewritten in a single day. People often say the truth will set you free, but they forget to mention that freedom can be lonely. That night, I sat by the basement door again. For the first time in weeks, there was no music, no voice, just silence. I almost missed it. But deep down, I knew he'd given me what I needed to find, and the rest was up to me. Still, I couldn't shake one question. If the tape had been only half a message, what else might be waiting down there, hidden among his things, waiting to speak again? The next morning felt heavier than usual, like the air in the house itself knew something had changed. I stood in the kitchen staring at the coffee pot as it gurgled, my reflection warped in the glass, wondering if I even recognized the woman looking back. I wasn't just a widow anymore. I was a grandmother to a girl I had never known, existed a woman whose husband had built a quiet wall of secrets out of love, and a mother who had been lied to by her own daughter. I wanted to be angry, to scream, to smash something, but all I could manage was stillness. Grief has a strange way of circling back. Just when you think you've buried it, it finds another crack to crawl through. People still debate whether time really heals all wounds or if it just teaches you how to hide the scars better. That day, I decided hiding wasn't an option anymore. I needed answers, complete ones. So I went back to the basement the same way I'd done on that first night when the music began. The air felt colder, heavier, as if the space had been holding its breath. I turned on the light and the bulb flickered for a few seconds before settling into a soft yellow glow. Dust danced in the air like tiny ghosts of the past. My husband's old workbench still looked untouched, but I noticed something new, a faint outline on the wall behind the wine rack. The paint there was slightly darker, smoother, like it had been retouched. My heart thudded. I moved the rack aside, and sure enough, there was a thin line running along the concrete, the edge of a sealed door. "What did you hide from me, Harold?" I whispered under my breath, brushing my fingers along the cold surface. I fetched his old hammer and chisel from the workbench and began tapping lightly. The concrete chipped away slowly, revealing a small hollow cavity. When I pried it open, a wave of stale, cold air hit my face. Inside was a metal lockbox covered in dust. I pulled it out and set it on the workbench. It was surprisingly heavy for its size. The keyhole was small, but I didn't need to search long. I still had that brass key from the storage unit. My hands trembled as I slid it in. It fit perfectly. With a soft click, the box opened. Inside, neatly folded, were several documents, a small velvet pouch, and one more cassette tape labeled in his familiar handwriting, "Listen first." My stomach dropped. I fetched the old player again, pressed play, and braced myself for his voice. The familiar crackle of static filled the room, followed by his slow, measured tone. "Martha," he began, "if you've found this, it means you've learned everything about Claire. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was trying to make sure she'd never feel the kind of emptiness we did after David died. But there's something else you need to understand, and I couldn't risk telling you while I was alive." I gripped the edge of the table as he continued. "When I changed the will, I didn't just add Claire. I changed the entire structure. The trust is split in two, one half for her, one for you. But your name isn't written directly. It's under a clause that ensures she can't access her inheritance until she finds you and makes peace. I wanted to tie you together even if I couldn't do it myself." I paused the tape and stared at the box, stunned. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was his last attempt at reconciliation. Even in death, he was still trying to fix what life had broken. "You always said family was about connection," his voice went on. "Well, I'm holding you to your own words." I laughed through tears, shaking my head. Typical Harold, sentimental and infuriating at the same time. Then his tone shifted softer, more fragile. "But there's something else in that box," he said. "You'll know when you see it. It's the part I never had the courage to talk about." My eyes darted to the velvet pouch. I opened it carefully and poured its contents into my palm, a gold locket slightly tarnished with an inscription inside that read, "For all we lost and for all we still have." Inside was a tiny photograph, David, maybe 17, grinning at the camera, and next to him, a baby girl in a white blanket. My breath caught. It was Claire. My husband must have carried that photo for years, maybe decades, without me knowing. I felt a wave of sorrow and tenderness all at once. He'd been grieving in his own way, just as I had quietly, privately protecting me by hiding his pain. It's strange how people love differently. Some do it loudly with words and embraces. Others do it in silence through the things they protect you from. I set the locket aside and unfolded the documents. They were financial statements, yes, but also letters addressed to me, drafts he'd never sent. "You deserve to know," one read. "But every time I tried to tell you, you'd smile, and I couldn't take that away." I sank into his old chair, feeling like the walls themselves were breathing memories. All those nights I'd thought I was alone, sitting upstairs while he worked late. He wasn't building shelves or fixing radios. He was writing to me, talking to our son through his letters, recording fragments of himself for when he was gone. I suddenly realized what that music had been. It wasn't haunting. It was the residue of love bleeding through old circuits, replaying the only way it knew how. I thought about calling my daughter, about telling her everything, but I stopped myself. She had lived with her own guilt long enough. Instead, I called Claire. I found something I said when she answered. "It's time you came here." When she arrived that evening, she looked nervous, standing in the doorway like she wasn't sure she belonged. "This was his space," I said softly, leading her down the stairs. "He recorded things here. Memories, I guess. Maybe even apologies." She smiled faintly. "He was always like that, too afraid to talk, so he'd write or record instead." I nodded. "You take after him, you know." She blushed. "That's what my mom used to say." We sat at the workbench side by side, and I played the tape again. We listened to Harold's voice fill the room, his confessions, his explanations, his final words of love. When it ended, she was crying quietly. "He really loved you," she whispered. "He loved us both," I said. "He just didn't know how to show it." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The basement was quiet again, but it no longer felt empty. It felt complete. As I turned off the recorder, I realized something I hadn't in all those sleepless nights. The music I'd heard at the beginning wasn't just his voice. It was his way of guiding me here, to this moment, to her. Maybe the human mind does strange things with memory and longing, or maybe, just maybe, love echoes longer than science can explain. For days after that night, I couldn't stay away from the basement. It no longer frightened me, it pulled me in. The air still carried the faint scent of dust and solder, that same quiet hum from the old radio equipment my husband used to repair. But now the silence felt different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was waiting. Every morning I'd go down there with a cup of tea, sit in his chair, and listen to the faint buzz of the old circuits, as if the walls themselves were exhaling after years of holding secrets. Claire began visiting often. She'd bring pastries from a bakery she worked at and sit across from me asking about her father, my son. "What was he like when he was my age?" she asked one afternoon, her eyes bright with curiosity. I smiled at the memory. Restless. Funny. He had this way of making everyone laugh even when you didn't want to. He'd play that same awful guitar he got from a pawn shop and sing out of tune, but everyone clapped anyway. She laughed softly. "So that's where Grandpa got it from." I smiled. Exactly. Neither of them could carry a tune to save their lives, but that didn't stop them. That moment made me realize something strange. For the first time in years, laughter felt natural in this house again. It didn't feel guilty or forced. It just fit. But there was one thing still weighing on me, my daughter. She hadn't spoken to me since that night on the porch. She sent a short text now and then, "Hope you're okay," but never called. Part of me wanted to reach out, but another part felt she needed time to face her own silence. People still debate whether forgiveness should be offered before it's asked for. My husband always said forgiveness was a gift you give to yourself first. I was starting to understand what he meant. One afternoon, as I was organizing the basement shelves, I came across a box I hadn't opened before, labeled simply "Personal Projects." Inside were old audio reels, handwritten notes, and a small envelope with my name on it. My pulse quickened as I unfolded the letter. "Martha," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope you found Claire. There's one last thing I need to explain about the music." I froze. "That night you heard something. It wasn't a coincidence," the letter went on. "There's a recorder hidden in the wall near the workbench, one I wired to start playing when the humidity changed. It was supposed to be a keepsake, a way for you to hear my voice every once in a while, a reminder that I was still with you somehow. I didn't mean to frighten you." My eyes filled with tears. He'd built that sound himself months before he died. He had planned it, a message from beyond, but not from ghosts, just from love. I found the small recorder exactly where the note said it would be, behind a loose panel near the power outlet. When I pressed play, the same song filled the air, his voice humming that country tune. But this time I heard something new, something I'd missed before the faint sound of laughter in the background mine. He must have recorded it while I was upstairs years ago, capturing a slice of our everyday life without me knowing. I listened to it over and over, tears sliding down my cheeks. I didn't stop it until the batteries died. That night, I called my daughter. It rang 5 times before she picked up. "Mom," she said cautiously. "It's me," I replied, my voice soft. "I found something. You need to come home." Silence stretched for a few seconds. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "It's time." She arrived the next morning, standing in the doorway like she had the first day she moved out, nervous, uncertain, clutching her purse like a shield. "Claire's coming too," I told her. She hesitated, then nodded. "I think I should meet her." When they arrived together, it was awkward at first. My daughter sat stiffly on the couch while Claire hovered near the doorway, unsure of her place. But then my daughter looked at her and said, "You have Dad's eyes." And just like that, something broke. The tension melted. They talked for hours about my husband, about David, about how all of us had been holding different pieces of the same story. My daughter eventually admitted through tears that keeping the secret had been her greatest regret. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said. "He was so sick and he begged me. But every time I saw you cry after he passed, it ate away at me. I reached over and took her hand. "He wasn't protecting me, honey," I said quietly. "He was protecting himself from his own guilt. We both suffered for it." "So what now?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "Now we stop keeping secrets." That evening, we went down to the basement together, 3 generations standing in the same space where everything had started. I played the tape one last time, letting his voice fill the room. My daughter cried openly, and even Claire wiped her eyes. When it ended, I said softly, "He built this so I'd never forget him. But maybe it's time to let the song rest." We stood in silence for a while. The room felt warm, lighter somehow. My daughter reached out and hugged me. "He'd be proud of you," she whispered. "No," I said with a small smile. "He'd be relieved." That night, as I lay in bed, the melody replayed faintly in my mind, not eerie this time, but comforting like a lullaby sung from another room. The house was finally quiet, but for the first time that quiet didn't scare me. It felt earned. Sometimes closure isn't about answers, it's about acceptance. Still, I couldn't help but wonder about the strange timing of it all. Why had the recorder started playing again after 2 years? Maybe it was pure coincidence, humidity wiring chance. Or maybe in some way the house knew I was finally ready to listen. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows like I hadn't seen in years. Claire was already in the kitchen making breakfast, humming that same old tune under her breath. I smiled. She didn't even realize she was doing it. Life somehow had found its rhythm again. The morning after we listened to the final tape, the house felt softer, lighter, like someone had lifted a veil. I woke up to the smell of toast and coffee, sounds of quiet laughter drifting up from the kitchen. Claire and my daughter were talking, their voices low but warm, like 2 people who had been strangers for too long and suddenly realized they shared the same rhythm. I stood by the doorway and watched them for a while unnoticed. It was a simple domestic scene, one that used to define my mornings years ago. For the first time since my husband's death, the house didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a home again. I joined them, and Claire poured me coffee without asking how I took it. "Grandma," she said casually, and that word grandma hit me like a wave. "We were thinking of going through the rest of Grandpa's things today. You know to organize everything properly." I nodded, trying to hide how emotional that single word made me. "All right," I said, "but don't touch the radio setup. That's sacred ground." My daughter smiled faintly. "He really loved this place, didn't he?" "More than anywhere else," I said. "It was the only room where his thoughts didn't have to behave." We spent hours sorting through his old tools, papers, and projects. It was like excavating the timeline of his mind, half-finished sketches, formulas he'd never explain, even little notes that said things like, "Fix this later," or "Remember to buy screws." He'd always been methodical to the point of obsession. Around noon, Claire found an envelope tucked behind a row of paint cans. "This one has your name on it," she said, handing it to me. I hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside was a single photograph, me and him younger, standing in front of our first house, smiling like fools. On the back in his handwriting were just 4 words, "Still building with you." My throat tightened. After all the secrets, the half-truths, the hidden recordings, this small note felt like his purest message. I put it in my pocket, unwilling to let it go. Later, while they cleaned up, I sat on his old stool and looked around. The basement didn't scare me anymore, but it did whisper reminders how quickly love can turn into mystery, how easily years of marriage can be rewritten by a few pieces of paper. People still debate whether you can ever truly know another person. I used to think you could, that love and time peeled away every layer. But now I think maybe you only ever get to know the version they're ready to share. Still, I loved him every version, even the one who hid things. By late afternoon, Claire and my daughter were upstairs making lunch, their laughter echoing faintly through the vent. I stayed behind, running my hand over the old workbench. That's when I noticed a hidden compartment underneath a small drawer I'd never seen before. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a small black and white photograph. The photo was of my husband and another man I didn't recognize standing beside a young Claire. On the back he had written, "For her in case she forgets." The note beside it read, "Martha, if you ever find this, show it to her. Tell her the man in the picture was her father's best friend, her other protector. I promised David I'd keep her safe, and he helped me. His name was Alan." I sat back, stunned. Alan had been David's college roommate. He'd died young, too, in a car crash just a year after David. I realized then that my husband hadn't just carried one secret, he'd been carrying all of theirs. He had been the last living witness to a small circle of people who loved deeply and lost quickly. Claire deserved to know. That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I showed her the photo. She studied it closely, her eyes soft. "I remember him," she said. "Mom used to say he was kind, that he helped her after my dad died. I didn't know he was gone too." "Your grandfather took care of a lot of people," I said quietly. "Sometimes I think that's why he hid so much. He didn't want to burden anyone with how heavy it all was." Claire nodded. "He must have loved you a lot to keep carrying that." I smiled. "He did, and I think he was trying to teach us something even now that love doesn't end when life does. It just changes form." We sat in silence for a while, watching the sky shift from gold to violet. My daughter joined us with 3 cups of tea, setting them down carefully. So she said, after a long pause, "What do we do with all of this? The letters, the tapes, the trust." I looked at her and smiled faintly. "We honor it, we don't hide it. We make sure Claire never has to wonder who she came from." My daughter nodded. "Then maybe we can start by visiting his grave tomorrow," she said. All of us, I repeated, liking the sound of it. That night, after they went to bed, I went downstairs one last time. The basement was quiet, the tape player unplugged the lights soft. I stood there for a while, letting the silence wash over me. Then, without meaning to, I hummed the melody, that same tune that had haunted me for months. My voice cracked at first, rusty from years of disuse, but as I kept going, it steadied. Halfway through, I could swear I heard another voice join me, not in a supernatural way, but in memory, in rhythm, in love. It was his voice, just as it had always been, not from the basement this time, but from somewhere within me. I smiled, tears sliding down my cheeks. "Good night, Harold," I whispered. "I finally heard you." The next morning was warm and clear, one of those rare days where the world feels briefly forgiving. My daughter drove Claire, sat in the back seat, and I held a small bouquet of white lilies, his favorite flowers. We didn't talk much on the way to the cemetery. The quiet wasn't heavy this time, just thoughtful. When we reached his grave, the grass was overgrown around the edges, but the stone itself was clean, the engraving still sharp. Harold Bennett, it read, "Loving husband, father, and dreamer." I kneeled down and brushed some dirt from the top, my fingers tracing the letters. "You always hated that word," I whispered. "Dreamer. You said it made you sound unreliable." My daughter smiled faintly. "He was the most reliable dreamer there ever was." Claire placed a single daisy beside the lilies. "He told me once," she said softly, "that people don't disappear, they just move into the stories we tell about them." I looked at her surprised. "He said that." She nodded. "Yeah." When I was little and I asked why my dad wasn't around, the wind rustled through the trees, and I swear for a second it sounded like that faint hum again, not eerie, just familiar, like a memory brushing past. We stayed for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. When we finally stood, my daughter took my hand. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "I think so," I said. "For the first time, I think I actually am." On the drive back, Claire suggested we stop by a diner she liked, a small place near the lake. The same kind of place my husband and I used to visit when we were younger, where the coffee tasted burnt and the pie always fell apart on the plate, but somehow it didn't matter. Over lunch, we talked about ordinary things, the weather, Claire's job, my daughter's garden. For once, there were no secrets between us, no walls. It felt like a small miracle, the kind you only notice after years of holding your breath. People still debate whether peace comes from forgiveness or understanding. I think it comes from both, but only after you stop needing all the answers. That evening when we got home, Claire helped me box up the last of Harold's belongings from the basement. Not to throw them away, just to make room for life again. As we worked, she found a small stack of old music sheets in one of the drawers. "He wrote these?" she asked, flipping through them. I nodded. "He used to compose little tunes for me when we were first married. Said he wanted our love to have its own soundtrack." She smiled, eyes glistening. "He really did love you." "Yes," I said softly, even when he didn't know how to show it. We finished packing everything by nightfall. The basement felt strangely new, like it had been waiting for this very moment to breathe again, to be something else. I turned off the light and closed the door gently. Later, as the 3 of us sat in the living room, my daughter pulled out an old photo album. "I think we should start adding new pages," she said. "Not to replace the old ones, but to keep the story going." "That's a good idea," Claire said. "He'd like that." I poured us each a cup of tea the same way Harold used to, too sweet, too hot. We laughed when I overfilled the cups, and for a moment it felt like he was right there rolling his eyes the way he always did when I made a mess. It's funny how love lingers in the smallest things, the way you stir your drink, the rhythm of a laugh, a smell, a sound. Those little details become ghosts of their own kind, but not the kind that haunt, the kind that hold you steady. After Claire went to bed, my daughter lingered. "Mom," she said, her voice hesitant, "do you think he knew how much you'd miss him?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said softly, "but I think he hoped I'd find my way back to him somehow." She nodded, tears brimming. "You did." I smiled. "We all did." When I finally went upstairs that night, I stood at the window and looked out at the garden. The moonlight shimmered across the lawn, and somewhere in the distance a neighbor's radio played a soft country tune, the same one Harold used to hum. I laughed quietly, shaking my head. Maybe it was just coincidence. Or maybe the universe was funny that way, giving you back what you lost once you were ready to hear it again. I went to bed with the window open, the sound drifting in like a lullaby. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without waking. No dreams, no whispers, no music from the basement, just the steady, peaceful rhythm of breathing, like the world itself had finally exhaled. The next morning, I woke to sunlight spilling across my bed and the faint smell of pancakes downstairs. Clara was already cooking, humming her voice soft and cheerful. "You're early," I said, smiling as I came down. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Too many good memories in this house now." My daughter joined us a few minutes later, still in her robe, and we ate breakfast together in that same kitchen that had felt so lonely for so long. And as we laughed about nothing in particular, I realized the house wasn't haunted after all. It was just full of echoes waiting for someone to listen. Weeks passed quietly, and life began to find a strange, gentle rhythm again. The house, once filled with silence and shadows, now buzzed with life. My daughter stopped by almost every evening after work, sometimes bringing dinner, sometimes just to sit and talk. Claire came on weekends, and each time she left, she'd hug me like she was trying to make up for all the years we'd lost. The basement had been transformed. We cleared out the old workbench and turned it into a small studio space. Claire brought her guitar, the one she'd been too shy to play before. "I think he'd want this," she said, running her fingers across the strings. And she was right. That room had always been Harold's sanctuary, but now it was something new, a space where his love could echo forward instead of backward. She recorded a song she'd written inspired by the tapes we found. The lyrics were soft and simple. "You left your voice in the floorboards, and I found it years too late. But every note you ever played still hums beneath my feet." The first time I heard her sing it, I had to step outside. The sound of her voice, young, trembling, raw, hit me with the force of memory and forgiveness all at once. I stood on the porch, tears streaking my cheeks, realizing how rare it was to feel this kind of peace after so much confusion. People still debate whether art heals or simply exposes what's been broken. Listening to Claire sing, I think it does both. It makes the pain visible, and in doing so, takes its power away. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail from the lawyer Robert Mills. Inside was a final document, the settlement of Harold's trust. The inheritance had officially transferred, half to me, half to Claire, bound by a shared signature. There was also a short note in Robert's neat handwriting. He wanted you to sign it together, said it mattered more than the money. When Claire came by that weekend, I showed it to her. "We're supposed to sign here," I said, pointing to the line. She smiled. "Together, together." We both picked up pens and signed side by side. The act felt oddly ceremonial, as though we were closing a circle that had been left open for too long. Afterwards, she laughed softly. "You know, he'd be so proud right now." "He'd also be annoyed it took us this long," I said, and we both burst out laughing. That evening, my daughter joined us for dinner. I cooked too much as usual. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, cornbread. The table felt full, not just with food, but with the quiet warmth of shared understanding. After dinner, my daughter suggested we go through the old photo albums together. "There are still some empty pages left," she said. "We should add new ones." We sat at the table past midnight, sorting through old photos, adding new ones beside them. Me holding Claire as a baby in a picture she'd brought the three of us together from last week, even a photo of Harold from decades ago caught mid-laugh. We glued them all side by side, past and present, finally sitting together on the same page. "You know what's funny," my daughter said, closing the book. "If you hadn't heard that music, none of this would have happened." I nodded slowly. "You're right. So maybe it wasn't an accident," Claire said softly. "Maybe some things happen because they're supposed to." I smiled at her. Maybe. Or maybe it's just life's way of keeping us honest. The next morning, I woke before dawn and wandered downstairs with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. I hadn't planned to go into the basement again, but my feet carried me there anyway. I turned on the light, the same soft bulb that had flickered so often before, and looked around. The shelves were tidy, the air calm. No music, no voices, just the faint hum of the refrigerator upstairs and the creak of the house settling into morning. I walked over to the spot where I'd first heard the sound months ago. My fingers brushed the wooden railing, tracing the grooves my husband's hands had worn into it over the years. "You did good, Harold," I whispered. "You left us something better than memories." I stood there for a long moment, listening to nothing, and it felt perfect. On my way back upstairs, I stopped by the door and noticed something shiny wedged in the corner, a small metal button. When I picked it up, I realized it was from his old flannel shirt, the one he used to wear down here. I smiled and slipped it into my pocket. I didn't need proof that he was still here, but somehow the universe liked giving me these little winks anyway. Later that day, I visited the hardware store and bought a small wooden plaque. I engraved it myself right above the basement door. It read, "His music built this house." It wasn't meant to be poetic. It was just true. My husband had built the walls, the shelves, the systems, and in his own strange, flawed way, he'd built the bridge that brought us all back together. That night, we had dinner again, laughter stories, the smell of food filling the kitchen. And when I looked around the table at my daughter, at Claire, at the home we'd rebuilt from ashes, I finally understood what he had meant in his last tape. "Family isn't what survives you," he'd said. "It's what you leave behind that keeps living." I raised my glass of wine. "To Harold," I said, "and to the songs that don't stop playing." Autumn came faster than I expected that year. The air turned sharp and the trees around the house wore gold and crimson like old royalty. Every morning I'd wake up to the sound of leaves brushing the windows and the scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen Claire's doing. She had practically moved in by then, sleeping in the guest room that used to be my daughter's when she was young. The sound of another person in the house no longer felt foreign. It felt right. My daughter still visited every few days, and when she couldn't come, she'd call. We were learning how to talk again, not about what was lost, but what was left. One Saturday morning, I found Claire in the basement with her guitar singing softly. She'd lit one of Harold's old lamps, and the glow fell across her face in the same way it used to fall across his when he worked. I leaned against the railing, watching her quietly. Her voice was stronger now, confident, with that kind of fragile courage people only get when they've finally forgiven the past. When she noticed me, she smiled. "I've been writing something new," she said. "Want to hear it?" I nodded. She started strumming the melody, slow and wistful. The lyrics told a story about a woman who found a song buried in her house, about how that song led her back to the people she'd lost. Halfway through, I realized she was singing about me. The moment broke me open in the best way. I walked over, placed a hand on her shoulder, and said softly, "He'd be proud of you. You think so? I know so." We stood there in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that's full instead of empty. "Grandma," she said finally, "I've been thinking about something. I want to record these songs, the ones Grandpa loved, the ones he used to hum. Maybe even release them online. I think people need to hear this story." I laughed. "You want to make us famous?" She smiled. "No. I just want people to know what love sounds like when it refuses to die. And how could I say no to that?" We spent the next few weeks turning the basement into a makeshift recording studio. My daughter brought over blankets and rugs to soften the echo, and Claire handled the rest, her laptop microphones, even a tiny sound mixer she bought secondhand. I'd sit on the old stool and watch her work the same way I used to watch Harold fix things. There was something healing about it, watching a new generation breathe life into the same space where I'd once felt only grief. One night, as we were finishing a recording, the power flickered. The lights dimmed, and for a moment the faint hum of the old circuits returned that same soft vibration that had started it all. We froze listening. Then just as suddenly it was gone. Claire turned to me, eyes wide. "You heard that right," I smiled. "Of course. Some things never really leave." She grinned, shaking her head. "You're getting sentimental, Grandma." "That's what happens when you turn 70, I said. though my chest ached in that sweet, familiar way. Later that night, after she went to bed, I sat alone at the workbench with one of Harold's old notebooks. Inside were doodles, measurements, bits of song lyrics, and one final note I hadn't noticed before. It was written in pencil faint, as if he jotted it down absent-mindedly. If she ever finds this, tell her I never stopped trying to fix the noise. I traced the words with my fingers, realizing something simple and profound. The noise he was talking about wasn't literal. It was life itself. The chaos, the misunderstandings, the things left unsaid. He'd been trying to make it all make sense even as his own time ran out. I whispered into the stillness, "You did, Harold. You fixed it." In the weeks that followed, Claire's songs began to get attention online. People left comments about how real and nostalgic her music felt. Some said it reminded them of their parents or grandparents. Others said it helped them forgive someone they hadn't spoken to in years. Watching her find her voice felt like watching Harold's legacy bloom in real time. My daughter joked that her father had turned us all into a family business not of money, but of emotion. And she wasn't wrong. One chilly evening, we decided to host a small gathering. Just family, neighbors, and a few of Claire's friends. She performed the songs live for the first time in the living room. I sat in Harold's old armchair while the room glowed with lamplight, the scent of apple pie and cinnamon filling the air. When Claire sang the last line, "You left your voice in the floorboards, and I found it years too late," there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even the neighbors who barely knew us stood clapping quietly, some with tears in their eyes. After everyone left, my daughter came over and kissed the top of my head. "You know," she said softly, "Dad would have loved this. He always wanted a full house." "He has one now," I said, smiling. "He always did. We just forgot to listen." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stayed up late by the window. Outside, the leaves rustled like quiet applause. The moonlight fell across the photo of Harold and me that I'd set on the table. I picked it up and whispered, "We did it. You can rest now." For the first time, I didn't expect a reply. I didn't need one. The peace was enough. But as I started to drift toward sleep, I thought I heard the faintest hum, again softer than before, more like a sigh. It wasn't haunting. It was gratitude. Months later, as winter settled in, the house was alive with motion again. Claire had officially moved in. My daughter came every Sunday for dinner, bringing her husband and grandkids. The walls that had once felt too wide now echoed with footsteps and laughter. I'd sit at the head of the table and watch them all, quietly amazed that something as simple as a melody could bring a family back from silence. Claire's album was finished by then. She titled it The Basement Song. On the cover was a photograph of Harold's old workbench, the locket he'd left behind resting on top of it. It wasn't famous by any stretch, just a small collection of songs streamed by people who stumbled across it and felt something familiar. But it didn't need fame. It had purpose. A few weeks before Christmas, Claire surprised me with a vinyl copy. For the archives, she said, handing it to me with a grin. I ran my fingers over the label the way my husband used to handle his records. "You've made something beautiful," I told her. "So did he," she replied. And that was the moment I realized legacy isn't what you leave behind in things or money or papers. It's what you leave behind in sound, in laughter, in the way people keep telling your story even when you're gone. One snowy night while wrapping gifts, I found myself humming again that same tune, soft and rhythmic. And when I looked up, I saw Claire standing in the doorway smiling. "You're still hearing him, aren't you?" she said teasingly. I smiled back. "No," I said. "I'm just remembering him right." She came over and sat beside me, resting her head on my shoulder. "You know," she said, "after a while I used to be scared of growing old, but not anymore. You make it look peaceful." "It can be," I said, "once you stop trying to rewrite the past." I looked out at the snow falling in the yard, blanketing everything in quiet forgiveness. "We all live long enough to understand the people we once judged," I said softly. "It just takes time. People still debate whether forgiveness is the end of love or its final act. I think it's both. It's how love says goodbye, without leaving." On New Year's Eve, we played Claire's record on the old turntable Harold had restored years ago. The crackle of the needle mixed with the melody, turning the whole room into something that felt sacred. We toasted with cheap champagne, laughing as the clock struck midnight. And when the song, The Basement Song, came on, we all went quiet. My daughter reached for my hand and Claire leaned against me. 3 generations listening to one man's voice carried forward by a woman he'd never met in a room he built with his own 2 hands. I thought of all the nights I'd sat alone, terrified of the sounds coming from below. I thought of how fear and love can sound so similar when you're standing in the dark. Now I knew the difference. The song ended, but none of us moved for a long while. The last note hung in the air, trembling like the heartbeat of a story finally told. And in that soft stillness, I felt it, the truth that had taken me a lifetime to understand. Nothing really ends. Love just changes rooms. That night before going to bed, I went down to the basement one last time. The air was cool and dry. The lights were steady. I ran my hand over the workbench, the same spot where I'd first found the tape. Then I turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a while, letting the dark settle in like a blanket. "Good night, Harold," I whispered. "You can stop playing now. We're all listening." And for the first time in years, the silence that followed was perfect. When people ask me now what really happened in that basement, I tell them it wasn't a mystery, it was a love story disguised as one. The music, the voice, the hidden tapes, they weren't signs from beyond. They were reminders that love in all its flawed humanity doesn't vanish when a body does. It lingers in circuits, in paper, in memory, in the spaces between words we never had the courage to say out loud. Sometimes I still go down there, not to listen, but to feel. The dust has settled, the boxes are labeled, and the air hums with a quiet calm. I sit in Harold's old chair with a cup of tea, letting the stillness hold me. It no longer feels like a place of grief. It feels like a second heartbeat beneath the house. Claire's songs play softly upstairs now, her voice weaving through the rooms like sunlight. My daughter laughs easily again, and when she hugs me goodbye, she holds on a little longer than she used to. I've learned that forgiveness isn't something you give once it's something you keep choosing over and over until peace feels natural. Love is the same way. It's a choice that keeps echoing long after the music stops. Tonight, as I write this, the house is quiet. The kind of quiet that feels earned, like the final note of a song that knows it said everything it needed to say. If you're still listening wherever you are, thank you for staying with me through this story. Maybe it reminded you of someone or something you've buried beneath your own floorboards. If it did, don't be afraid to listen. The echoes might just be love, finding its way back home. Good night, everyone. And if you can stay a little longer, subscribe, and let's meet again for the next story.